Thank you. We're back on schedule. We're really honored to have a real friend of the Naval War College. One of the most enlightening things about my 2 years working at the headquarters of the Marine Corps was putting to bed forever the notion that somehow Marines aren't well educated and aren't brilliant. I think that's part of their cover and deception plan. But 2 years there at the heart, they're working for Colonel Work, now Undersecretary Work, was just a real honor. And so it's a special honor to welcome back and to introduce the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps. We're honored to have the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Joseph F. Dunford Jr. as our next speaker. General Dunford was promoted to General and assumed the duties of Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps on 23 October 2010. General Dunford graduated from St. Michael's College and was commissioned in 1977. As a general officer, he served as Assistant Division Commander, 1st Marine Division, the Director of Operations Division, Plans, Policies, and Operations, Headquarters Marine Corps, and the Deputy Commandant for Plans, Policies, and Operations, and most recently as Commanding General, 1st MEF, and Commander, Marine Forces Central Command. General Dunford is a graduate of U.S. Army Ranger School, Marine Corps Amphibious Warfare School, and the U.S. Army War College. He holds a Master at Arms in Government from Georgetown University and a Master at Arts in International Relations from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Ladies and gentlemen, the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Dunford.
Admiral Christensen, thanks for that introduction, I think. Secretary of Work, ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute pleasure to be with you here this afternoon. And although you'd expect me to say that, it really is. When you looked at Secretary of Work's slides early this morning, and he said what keeps him awake at night, one of the things he indicated there was lack of time to think. And as I was sitting there this morning, listening to the speakers and listening to the panelists, I realized how little time I personally have for introspection. Those of us in the Pentagon probably are key violators of that bullet on Secretary Work's slide. And so honestly, the opportunity to listen to this morning's panelists and speakers and to have an opportunity to think both this morning and this afternoon really is a pleasure. This morning, Secretary of Work addressed U.S. grant strategy and maritime power. And we heard from a distinguished panel on emerging global trends and strategic challenges. This afternoon, I'm going to follow up on those, but offer a much more narrow and uniquely Marine Corps perspective. As a service, we're well along in a period of transition. It's been almost 2 years since we pulled our last ground forces out of Iraq, and we've begun the transition in Afghanistan. Like all the services, we're adapting to meet the requirements of a new strategy in a period of declining resources. And I'll be honest, during this first round of cuts, we've been forced to make some pretty tough choices. These are challenging times, and I don't think there's anybody out there who thinks it's going to get easier. In fact, I guess the consensus is that times will only get tougher, particularly from a budgetary perspective. And while I'm clearly concerned about the future of our nation and many of the challenges that will be discussed over these next couple of days, I'm with Secretary of Work from the perspective of I'm not all doom and gloom. As he indicated this morning, we're in a maritime moment, and there are opportunities, particularly for the Navy Marine Corps team, if we clearly articulate those capabilities that we have that are relevant to the new strategy. It's particularly important that we emphasize what we bring to the fight right now so it's recognized in future resource decisions. And I think the words of Samuel Huntington that were on the slides this morning were written almost 50 years ago, but I frankly think they're as true today as they were 50 years ago with regard to strategic concept. And so what I thought I would do this afternoon is provide you with the historical foundation of the Marine Corps strategic concept, and then probably more importantly, talk to you about how we'll operationalize that in the future. The chaplain, just before lunch, stood up and said that he was not going to preach this afternoon. I would like you to note that I'll make no such disclaimer as I begin my remarks. Well, the circumstances that we confront today are in many ways unique. This is not the first time in our nation's history that we've reordered our priorities or faced great pressure to reduce the Defense Department. It happened after World War II, it happened after Korea, it happened after Vietnam, it happened in the 1990s after Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And there's lessons to be learned from each one of these drawdowns, and to be honest, over the past year, we've spent an awful lot of time studying those drawdowns, studying those periods of declining resources, studying those periods where we reordered our strategic priorities and tried to draw those lessons learned. I'd like to focus on the World War II era for a few minutes, because I think the lessons from that particular period are really relevant today. There's a number of them that you could pull right out, I believe, and apply to today's challenges. The drastic reductions that we saw after World War II were the most that we've ever seen in our history. We conducted, obviously, an historic demobilization, but simultaneously, the nation was involved in a strategic review. There was an assumption at the time that the United States would not fight in Asia. Interesting, the strategic focus after World War II was almost exactly the opposite of what it is today. We made a pivot to Europe as opposed to a pivot to the Pacific in the 1940s, the emphasis obviously on future challenges in Europe. There were also the assumptions made during that period of time about the kinds of capabilities and capacities that we would need in the future, and it was not a particularly good time for the Navy and the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps was close to 450,000 strong in 1945 when the Secretary of Navy, then Secretary of Navy Forrestal, was observing the flag raising at Suribachi, and he said that flag raising will guarantee a Marine Corps for another 500 years. In 1949, not 4 years later, the Marine Corps is at about 70,000 strong and heading south. That year, Secretary of Defense Lewis Johnson remarked, "There's no reason for having a Navy and a Marine Corps. General Bradley tells me amphibious operations are a thing of the past. We'll never have any more amphibious operations. That does away with the Marine Corps." And before the sailors in the audience start to get comfortable, Johnson went on to say, "General Bradley tells me that the Air Force can do anything the Navy can do, and therefore that does away with the Navy." That particular debate about amphibious capabilities in the Marine Corps ended with the Korean War. In July of 1950, 11 divisions of the North Korean People's Army attacked across the 38th parallel. The U.S. forces, days later, were engaged in a ground war. We were fighting in an unexpected time, at an unexpected place, and the initial results were disastrous. Most of you in this room probably recall the early days of the Korean War, either from your readings of history here at school, or many of you who were actually fought in Korea. I spoke to somebody at the break who fought in Korea. But you remember the first U.S. forces that were engaged in the Korean War were led by a young Army lieutenant colonel by the name of Brad Smith. Brad Smith was in Japan. He was part of the Japanese occupation army. He had an understrength battalion of 2 companies. He was called to meet his general, General Dean, at the airport in Japan. And his commanding general said, "Hey, Brad, I need you to take your battalion and go to Korea. I need you to move as far north as you possibly can towards Osan. Find a good piece of ground, defend, stop the North Koreans. I wish there was more I could do for you. God bless you, and good luck." On July 5th of 1950, Task Force Smith made first contact with the North Korean People's Army. And as they fired their 2.36-inch rocket launchers at the North Korean tanks, the rounds plinked off. We had in our inventory at the time 3.5-inch rocket launchers, but we didn't field them in the Pacific because we didn't assume we would need them in the Pacific. And despite really what was some capable leadership by Brad Smith, within 7 hours of making first contact with the North Korean People's Army, Task Force Smith had 185 killed, wounded, or missing in action. The pattern repeated itself many times during the opening days of the Korean War. And the momentum finally shifted, of course, in September 1950 when members of the Marine Corps that had fought down at the Pusan perimeter and became the go-to force for Walton Walker also became part of the amphibious turning movement at Incheon that changed the course of the war. In Korea, we learned the cost of being unprepared for the unexpected. Despite the efforts of some of our best strategists the nation has produced, to include George Marshall, we didn't get it right, and we did not mitigate the cost, the risk of getting it wrong. In 1951 and 52, Congress held hearings to address the need for our nation to be better prepared for the next crisis. They were shocked at our unpreparedness for the Korean conflict, and they were determined that we'd be adequately prepared for future challenges. After hearing from witnesses and studying the events of 1950, the 82nd Congress concluded that the nation needed a standing force in readiness that was highly mobile, combat ready, and able to hold aggression at bay while decisions were made and we mobilized. The Congress also recognized that our day-to-day interests required forces that could respond to crises before they actually turned into wars. Heavily influenced by the performance of Marines in Korea, and because we're a maritime nation with an aversion to large numbers of troops based overseas, the Congress at that time believed the nation's force and readiness should be sea-based and expeditionary. At that time, they believed it ought to be the United States Marines. Thus, the Korea experience is the foundation of our strategic concept. And Marines have performed that role for the past 60 years, that role that was envisioned by the 82nd Congress, which is not to say today that we're complacent or we're focused on the rearview mirror. But if nothing else, recalling our experience in Korea should be a reminder to approach the future with humility. And in that regard, I'm with Dr. Lieber on this morning's panel when he spoke about that very thing, approaching the future with humility. You know, I talk to junior officers all the time, and I say that when I was a second lieutenant, my level of confidence that I had all the answers was about right here. And my level of experience was about right here. As my career has progressed, my level of confidence that I have all the answers has plummeted to a new low as my experience has increased. And that's actually where I am today and really my perspective as we look towards future challenges. Well, we can certainly anticipate future trends that will shape the strategic landscape, and we ought to do that. We ought to think about some of the things that were discussed this morning. We ought to think about the growing influence of non-state actors, the challenges associated with failed and failing states, proliferation, increased competition for resources, and extremism. We need to remember that there's absolutely no chance that we can predict the future. And while trying to get it right, we have to mitigate the risk of getting it wrong. As we implement the new strategy, we have to ensure that we maintain the capabilities and capacities that will allow us to be responsive to the unexpected. I think Secretary Panetta did a good job in addressing those in his guidance for the Comprehensive Strategic Review. As a result, the new strategy emphasizes that we must maintain a stabilizing presence abroad and be prepared to respond to unexpected crises and contingencies. The strategy also highlighted the need to protect the capabilities required to gain and maintain operational access and deploy decisive combat power rapidly. Geographically, the strategy calls for rebalancing in the Pacific. Secretary Work addressed that this morning, while remaining engaged in the Middle East. I don't think there's anybody that believes that we'll draw down significantly in the Middle East for the foreseeable future. The requirements for the new strategy are exactly why I remain so optimistic about the future of the Navy and the Marine Corps. Even in an era of pessimism and fiscal constraints, I see the continued relevance of the Marine Corps role established by the 82nd Congress. And when I look at the focus areas of the new strategy, I see naval forces as a critical enabler that will allow us to deter and defeat adversaries, to rebalance in the Pacific, and to remain globally engaged despite a significant reduction in the number and the size of U.S. bases and stations around the world. The same forces that are supporting combatant commanders' day-to-day requirements are going to be prepared to respond and buy decision space for leadership in a time of crisis. And in the event of a contingency, we'll be there to provide assured access for the joint force, just as we did not in the Korean War, but in the opening days of Afghanistan with Task Force 58. I don't need to tell this group that in many ways past is prologue. Even while supporting operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, the Navy and the Marine Corps team has remained forward deployed and forward engaged in other regions. In fact, we've responded to more than 20 crises outside of Iraq and Afghanistan since 9/11. Those crises have ranged from natural disasters to non-combatant evacuation operations to combat operations. They include the recent humanitarian crises in Pakistan, the Philippines, and Japan, taking down pirates on the MV Magellan Star and supporting the no-fly zone in Libya. While we expect to conduct similar operations in the future, we're going to make some course and speed corrections as we respond to new strategic priorities and prepare for the future security environment. So now let me transition and talk a little bit about what you can expect to see. As we've discussed, the main effort in the new strategy is the Pacific, and we're already posturing to rebalance and support Admiral Locklear's theater campaign plan. We have plans and initial support in place for revised Pacific laydown of our Marine Expeditionary Force in the Pacific. It's 3 Marine Expeditionary Force that includes 22,000 Marines west of the date line in Okinawa, Japan, in Guam, mainland Japan, and in Australia. And while this posture will allow us to continue to respond in the traditional challenges of Northeast Asia, it also will support better our ability to respond in Southeast Asia, where we have significant interests, challenges, and opportunities. Early this spring, the first 200 Marines deployed to Australia. What they will do during their first 6-month deployment is indicative of what we expect Marines to do in the future. After spending a couple of months training with their Australian counterparts in Australia, they embarked aboard the USS Germantown, where they are right now, and they'll conduct exercises with our partners in Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Singapore. We're also reconstituting what we call our unit deployment program in Okinawa, and that's simply our rotational construct that we use to man the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Force. We stopped that program in 2004 as a result of our commitments in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we're reconstituting that. In fact, the 1st Infantry Battalion in our unit deployment program returned to Okinawa last month. So we are now, again, even as we continue to draw down in Afghanistan, reorienting towards the Pacific and bringing Marine Air Ground Task Force capabilities in increasing numbers to the Western Pacific. In the end, our Pacific posture will support being forward deployed and engaged to develop relationships of trust and interoperability with our partners. Our robust presence in the Pacific will also provide a clear demonstration of commitment to the region, inspire confidence in our partners, and deter potential adversaries. And in this regard, you know, when I listened to Dr. Citron this morning, and he talked about technology obviating the need for us to be forward deployed and forward engaged because we can respond from here, I would just like to point out that, you know, there's an expression that Marines and sailors have used for some time, and that is that virtual presence is actual absence. And I can tell you from a recent visit to the Pacific, as I engaged our Australian partners, as I engaged our Japanese partners, as I spoke to our Korean partners, you know, it's not just the United States wanting to move to the Pacific. There is a clear, loud demand signal from our partners in the Pacific for us to be there, to be engaged with them on a day-to-day basis, and again, to provide a demonstrable signal that we are committed for a long term to the Pacific. So I don't think you can do that from the continental United States, and exactly what I just talked about is what the forces in the Western Pacific are designed to do. Well, the Pacific will become the main effort. We expect the current challenges in the broader Middle East, as I mentioned, to continue for some time to come. And we're going to continue to provide the Central Command with the kind of persistent forward-deployed Marine forces embarked aboard amphibious ships that exist today and will exist in some time in the future. And as Secretary Work said, the current combatant commander, General Mattis, refers to his theater, the United States Central Command, as a maritime theater. We'll also remain uniquely postured to provide rotational forces to mitigate the risk of an overall reduced presence in Africa and South America. A good example of how we'll do that is what we call Special Purpose MAGTF Africa. I visited them over Memorial Day weekend. We have a reserve force reconnaissance company that's based in Sicily. They're providing command and control for a number of teams that are down in Africa right now, providing Phase 0 or theater security cooperation support in accordance with General Ham's plan for Africa. During their 6-month rotation, they'll conduct capacity building and exercises with 9 different countries during that 6 months. This is the second rotation that we've had for Special Purpose MAGTF Africa, and as we mature the concept, we'll also increase their ability to do crisis response. Today, they have a limited crisis response capability. They can support non-combatant evacuation operations, as an example. But in the future, even though there won't be amphibious ships necessarily in that particular region, we will find other innovative ways to lift Marines around the region and to remain the crisis response force of choice in all of the combatant commands, to include those that don't necessarily have the kind of amphibious capability that we have had in the past. Let me just go back and emphasize the point about crisis response. Consistent with our strategic concept, I mentioned a minute ago that we want to be the crisis response force of choice in every combatant command. And we're doing a few things right now that will enhance our crisis response capability. In the United States CENTCOM, we recently established a 1-star headquarters oriented on the United States Central Command. That one-star headquarters is JTF capable. It lives in the region. It trains with our allies in the region. It's immediately responsive to the combatant commander. What we have seen over the past several years is that one-star level command and control is the coin of the realm for combatant commanders in a crisis. That was certainly the case in operations in Pakistan, in operations in Lebanon, in operations in the Philippines and elsewhere, and so we're doing that. We also have had historically a one-star headquarters in the Pacific, the 3rd Marine Expeditionary Brigade, which truly has been the crisis response force of choice for the Pacific Command, and what we're doing is beefing up the capabilities of that particular organization. Another adjustment we're going to make is how we're going to use the resources that we have. And to be honest with you, we're going to have to be a lot more creative in using the tools that we have to overcome some of the challenges of disaggregation. Meeting our day-to-day requirements in the future is going to cause us to be more disaggregated, as Secretary Work alluded to. And if you think about the Pacific laydown I described earlier, we'll have Marines from mainland Japan all the way down to Australia. But despite the fact that they will be more relevant on a day-to-day basis because of that disaggregation, it's very important that we think through the challenges of aggregating that force in the event of a crisis or a contingency. And one of the ways we'll do that is to be more creative about our use of maritime prepositioned ships, joint high-speed vessels, and our aviation combat element. You know, for example, in the future, we're going to have 2 maritime prepositioned squadrons. But the capabilities of some of the ships, like the LMSR and the mobile landing platform, will allow us to use those squadrons, not like we have historically as just a break glass in time of war capability, but to be able to use those squadrons to form a Seabase to support our operations across the range of military operations, from that day-to-day engagement to crisis response to, again, the contingency response or providing assured access for the joint force. I've touched on it already, but I'd like to come back to the continued requirement for a sea-based forcible entry capability. As the budget deliberations have gone on, some inside and outside the Department of Defense have once again begun to question that capability. And from my perspective, they've begun to question that capability in a fact-free environment similar to the one that Lewis Johnson lived in the 1950s. Currently, we have a requirement for 2 Marine Expeditionary Brigades of forcible entry capability. And a couple of points for those who don't understand the utility of those 2 Marine Expeditionary Brigades worth of forcible entry capability. Forcible entry and access from the sea in general extends naval relevance into the human domain. When we consider access challenges, our thinking can't end at the high water mark. I wouldn't assume that we'll be invited to all future conflicts. There will be times when we go places where folks don't want us to go. Given where conflict's likely to occur, I also wouldn't assume that wherever we go, we'll have mature infrastructure. That is, the ports, the airfields, and the resources necessary to support the joint force. My assumption is it won't always be there. So as a maritime nation with global interest, the fact that we have ships and enablers to support a 6th Battalion Marine Air Ground Task Force that can come from the sea and provide assured access for the joint force seems to me a fairly minimal investment and a reasonable investment. It's a capability we have to maintain for a wide range of potential crises and contingencies, and not just as it is today for the current operational plans. To put it in perspective, we needed 6 battalions to take down Fallujah, which was a town of 250,000, largely empty. And we needed another 3 battalions just to secure the perimeter of Fallujah back in 2004. We're talking about a maritime nation maintaining the capability to provide assured access from the sea with a force of 6 infantry battalions with all the Marine Air Ground Task Force capability that goes with that. As a final point on the subject, some say that because of the current anti-access area denial capabilities of potential threats, that amphibious assault is impossible. And that's been said before. I don't believe it was true then. I don't believe it's true now. The challenge is to conduct amphibious operations in a manner that exploits our extraordinary capabilities. The challenge is to leverage that asymmetric capability that we have and the advantages that we have in things like ISR and joint fires and conduct operations in a different way. The challenge is to use the sea as maneuver space in the context of the modern threat. And I don't think we need to give up on the capability. We just need to find new ways to deal with the challenge. Some hear the words amphibious and quickly make an association with Tarawa or Iwo Jima. And I want to make it clear, that's not what I'm talking about. Frontal assaults on the Pacific Islands in World War II don't characterize modern amphibious assault any more than Midway characterizes today's air-sea battle. Some have suggested that we change the words. Don't call it amphibious assault anymore. We're not going to do that. We're going to ensure that folks understand the definition. My point in mentioning forcible entry to you today is simply to let you know that we are absolutely committed to that capability and all the enablers that will allow us to assault from the sea in the future. Years from now, when Marines are forward deployed and forward engaged, and they get the call to make a hole for the joint force, they're going to go when and where they are needed, with or without permission, and with or without ports or airfields. And they're going to use the sea as maneuver space to put any future enemy at a positional disadvantage. Before closing and taking questions, I'd just like to say that I recognize that we have significant challenges ahead. And clearly, we need to think about new and innovative ways to deal with those challenges. And frankly, that's what Admiral Christensen and his team are doing here over these course of these couple of days, is exactly that, giving us an opportunity to perhaps peek into the future, think about what those challenges are, and then more importantly, as leaders, to effect the changes necessary to allow us to deal with those challenges. But while we certainly can and should adjust our organizational constructs and our tactics and our equipment, we should change all those things. We need to be mindful of those capabilities that are in our inventory that have an enduring value. And from my perspective, that's where the robust Navy Marine Corps team comes in. I think it's a capability that has an enduring value. It's not yesterday's Navy Marine Corps team, it's tomorrow's Navy Marine Corps team. It's not yesterday's strategy, it's not yesterday's strategic landscape, it's tomorrow's strategy and tomorrow's strategic landscape. And again, it'll be a decidedly different United States Marine Corps in the future. It'll be a decidedly different United States Navy in the future. But with regard to the enduring capabilities we bring to our nation, I very much believe that strategic concept that was founded in 1950 with the results of the Korean War is as relevant today and will be as relevant tomorrow as it was in 1950. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, I'll wrap it up with my formal remarks, and I'd be glad to take any questions you might have. Thank you. Chaplain.
I won't preach, sir. You did a great job. Sir, given the pivot to Asia, how do you see the security measurement with the Strait of Malacca, for example, given its importance to the world's global market vis-a-vis the piracy issues?
Look, one of the things that I believe we're doing, as I referred to when we moved down to Australia, is providing more stability in Southeast Asia, developing relationships in Southeast Asia that are absolutely going to make that part of the world much safer. And if you look at the exercises that I rattled off that we're conducting, many of those are west of the Strait of Malacca for that very reason, to ensure we stabilize that area. But there's two parts of it. One is that we really do view the exercises and the engagement that we're conducting as stabilizing the region. But should that not, in the event, be successful, then one of the things that amphibious capabilities do is allow us to maintain those Straits of Malacca. You know, when you look at Secretary Work's slides and you look at the reliance that our partners have on that part of the world, and you look at the reliance on our economy in the Straits of Malacca, we absolutely have the capabilities inherent in the United States Marine Corps and the United States Navy Marine Corps team to keep those straits open were that to be required.
Excuse me, sir, one last thing. You talked about the African continent. We just got back to 14th Marines, as you know, sir, from FY12 Operation African Lion. And I don't know if you want to talk about that, but sir, that is one of the examples that you talked about overall.
Well, just following up really more broadly than African Lion, I mean, the point that I tried to make in the presentation is that as a result of declining resources, we've made priorities. We've outlined those priorities. Our priority is the Pacific, and we certainly know that we're going to have an economy of force in the United States Central Command, but we're going to be decisively engaged in the Central Command. That leaves our interests in places like Africa, South America, and Europe largely unaddressed by traditional capabilities. We're not going to have significant amphibious capability in Europe. We're not going to have significant amphibious capability for the foreseeable future around Africa, and we're not going to be able to do that in South America as well. We'll still certainly try to have, on a rotational basis, some symbol of U.S. commitment, but it's not going to be like it has been in the past as we draw down resources and as we focus on those two hubs. So Africa Lion, what you're referring to, but really more broadly, is we have created the organization I referred to, a Special Purpose Marine Air Ground Task Force. In the end, we expect that force in Africa that supports Africa to be about 450 Marines. They'll be on about a 6-month rotation, and again, during that 6-month rotation, while they won't have amphibious ships, they will have the V-22, they will have C-130s, they will potentially have high-speed vessels, and we will be able to provide the kind of capacity building and engagement that at least provides a sense of commitment to that particular region. Again, not the same level of commitment, not the same capabilities that we'll deploy in the Pacific or the Central Command, but with innovative ways to use the forces that we currently have. And that really is our challenge, I think, is this is the world as it is. These are the capabilities that we have. We have to find new ways of using them, and we need to be able to do that in a way that certainly Admiral Greenert is doing with his 4 deployed naval forces. He's achieving the effect of having more with less, and we're going to have to find the same ways to do that with our engagement in places like Africa. So, again, our movement to create Special Purpose MAGTF Africa is, I think, a model of what we will be doing in the future as we try to address those targets in areas where we don't have necessarily the capabilities we've had in the past. Yes, sir.
Ed Walbridge, Chicago. Regarding the Joint Strike Fighter, what is your position on the Joint Strike Fighter given the shift to unmanned aircraft, which would seem to make it less necessary?
Yeah, I'm not as optimistic as the doctor was this morning in terms of the timeline. I believe we'll be increasingly relying on unmanned aircraft, and someday I'd like to think that conflict won't be there anymore because we're all smarter. But I don't think we're there yet. And with regard to the Joint Strike Fighter, the 5th generation capability, the sensor capability, the warfighting capability of that aircraft will bring the joint force to a whole new level. I mean, we're absolutely bullish on a Joint Strike Fighter. And over the past year, quietly, not with as much public, there was all kinds of publicity when the Joint Strike Fighter was getting out of the gate, and we had some challenges. We had some technical challenges easily solved by engineers, and we obviously had some development challenges. Over the past year, the F-35B, as an example, the Marine Corps version of the Joint Strike Fighter, has met all of its test points. It's flown off an amphibious ship. It's proven to be a highly capable aircraft, and I think that aircraft flying off amphibious ships is going to provide our nation with, instead of the 11 big deck carriers that would have a 5th generation fighter, that provides us 22 ships to our nation that has a 5th generation fighter. We can fly off 10 times the number of airfields with that particular aircraft, the F-35B, that you could with a traditional aircraft. And so combined with the F-35C coming off our carriers and the B coming off our amphibious ships, I think that's going to be the model for some 15, 20, 25 years to come. I personally believe, like the doctor this morning, that at some point there'll be an increasing preponderance of our aircraft that'll be unmanned. It's impossible for me to imagine that that's going to be in 5, 7, or 10 years. I think we're still going to have manned aircraft well into the 2020s, 2030s, and I think the F-35 is a critical part of that aviation portfolio that will allow us to deal with those anti-access area denial challenges that we spoke about this morning. Yes, sir.
General, my name is Anthony Favalli. Are there any plans to cooperate with the Chinese to defend the Straits of Malacca? After all their oil comes through there.
Well, in terms of cooperating with the Chinese, clearly establishing military-to-military relationships with the Chinese is very difficult. I spoke at the Australian War College about 6 or 7 weeks ago, and interestingly enough, there was a Chinese colonel, in the class that asked me, why were we doing all the things we're doing, considering the Chinese are not being provocative, they're really not developing their military capabilities, and they just can't understand why the United States be moving to that part of the world. Of course, much of what he said was not true, and but my point to him, what I came back with was, I said, look, at the end of the day, this is about trust. And we are in the process right now of ensuring that we have the trust that we need to have with our allies. And we're doing some things that are confidence building in that particular region. For example, the Australians, the Indonesians, the Malaysians, Singapore, they're not particularly interested right now in conducting high-end exercises that replicate warfighting. But they are very interested in collaborating and working together on humanitarian assistance, disaster relief type operations, which will help build a foundation of trust. Right on the spot, I invited the Chinese colonel. I said, hey, I've heard Secretary Panetta, so I know I'm well within policy to tell you that we'd be happy to have the Chinese participate in future exercises, particularly those that are associated with humanitarian disaster relief, particularly those that will require a high degree of collaboration. I mean, the one thing we know about in Asia is natural disasters are going to occur. Next month, 6 months from now, a year from now, they're going to occur. Routinely they do, and they require significant capability to be brought to bear, capability that is characteristically only found in military forces. So I think that the most potential I can see in the near term with the Chinese is to use those kinds of exercises as confidence-building measures to develop relationships. I personally have a tremendous belief in the kind of military-to-military relationships that developed in places like right here at the Naval War College. Those historically have been the kind of relationships that we relied on in time of crisis. I can remember working on the Joint Staff, back in 1999 when we had some significant challenges with Indonesia. And the only one in the U.S. government that was able to pick up the phone was at the time the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Joel Ralston, who was a good friend of General Udiano, and he was able to pick up the phone and relay from the U.S. government what our position was during that time of crisis in Indonesia. Similar things happened in Pakistan when the coup occurred. I just think that mill-to-mill relationships in the Pacific, here in the schoolhouse, are going to be important, and we're certainly going to try to develop those in the future. I know that's a critical part of Admiral Locklear's theater campaign plan. I have lulled the crowd into sleep, either me or lunch. Yes, sir, in the back.
Hi, General. Cy Korolenko here. We mentioned the Korean War. Let's go back to the Korean War for a moment. General MacArthur said basically, I got problems. I can't stop the Chinese. They come like ants. I need some nukes. And General LeMay, head of Strategic Air Command, immediately sent the B-36 to Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa. We were sitting there waiting. Basically, it was that President Truman said, no, you can't use nukes. We had Cold War Sea Conference here a couple of years ago, and basically what we had some retired Soviet politicians and spokes. Basically, Soviet Union would not get involved. Actually, they did not allow any military ships, aircraft within, 100 kilometers of North or South Korea. So the Air Force was there to support you, but they got stopped. I was there, that's what I'm saying.
I didn't for 1 minute understate the importance of the United States Air Force as a part of the joint team. I told you right up front that I was here to preach. What it said on the schedule was I was supposed to provide a Marine Corps perspective, and I'm sure that Admiral Christensen will have somebody come out here and give an Air Force perspective as well. But, sir, thanks for your service, and absolutely big fan of the United States Air Force. Yes, sir.
General, you talked briefly about the importance of being able to deal with non-state actors and failed states. And all the speakers have touched on that, but I haven't really heard a strategy or really thoughts about a strategy other than returning to the Pacific. And I'm wondering if the reason for that is that it's viewed as only secondarily a military problem and more of an intelligence problem, or is there no strategy, or what?
No, what I can address for you, and probably a little bit more explicitly than I did in my remarks, is part of the strategy for dealing with non-state actors, which historically moved to failed and failing states. I mean, that's the basis from which they operate. And so a critical part, when I talk about being forward deployed and forward engaged, When I talk about those countries that we're visiting in Africa, when I talk about the countries that we visit in the Pacific, a critical part, the in order to, if you will, of those engagements is to assist those countries in developing their security capabilities and capacities such that they can deal with the threats inside of their borders, so that we prop up those states that have failed or failing so they have the wherewithal to provide the security and deny the enemy the sanctuary from which they can operate. That's a critical part of the strategy. I think that's the military piece. Does that get at your question?
Well, somewhat. For example, well, Afghanistan would be a good example, or Yemen, where it's not really clear to me that you have the capacity at this moment to turn those, or even assist those states in turning themselves into non-sanctuary locales.
Yeah, I think, I mean,
If that's the case, is that not a military mission, or what do we do?
I think clearly in Afghanistan, there's a military piece, and a critical military piece, as you hear General Allen talk about every day, and as many of the students that are here this year have actually participated and contributed to. The military piece of the strategy in Afghanistan is to grow the capabilities of the Afghan security forces such that they can assume responsibility themselves. There's also clearly an economic and a political piece that has to work. Legitimate governance in Kabul is part of it, legitimate local governance, and then the economic infrastructure that's going to allow that country to sustain itself in the future. So that clearly in Afghanistan is very complicated. And I can talk to you with some degree of optimism about the military piece of that, in a sense that I have watched over the last 3 or 4 years the growth of the Afghan security forces such that I think they are growing increasingly capable of dealing with the threat inside of that country. The economic and the political challenges, more problematic, more enduring, and are going to require a much more concerted effort over a much longer period of time to deal with those. I mean, I think we have found how just difficult. We're reminded. I don't think we found out anything. I think we've been reminded in Iraq and Afghanistan of how difficult those types of endeavors are. But again, from the military perspective, our mission in Iraq, once we provided an environment within which we could grow Iraqi security forces, was to do just that. It's exactly the mission that we have in Afghanistan today, and it's exactly what we'll do between now and 2014 as we transition from Afghanistan, is increasingly grow the capacity of the Afghan security forces. I think we have time for one or two. Yes, sir. Please.
My name's Janice Morris. I'm from Chicago, Illinois, and I wanted to ask you a fiscal question. With the current governmental desire to cut the budget, how easy is it for the recruits to join the Marines, and how easy is it for recruits that are, for members of the Marines to stay in the force? And how much are the Marines being cut? How much?
Okay, sure. Let me start with Secretary of Work alluded to some of it this morning. We grew to 202,000 Marines as a result of operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. As we went through this comprehensive strategic review last year, our end strength was set at 182,100, so that's a reduction of 20,000. The good news, I think, from my perspective, is we'll conduct that drawdown over the course of 4 years. We'll do it in a very deliberate manner so that we don't have mandatory reductions in force. We're not kicking people out of the Marine Corps right now. If a Marine has a contract, we're honoring that contract till the end of his or her contract. And the reason we're doing that is because we recognize what they have done over the past 10 years, and it's a critical part of what General Amos describes as keeping faith with Marines. Now, on the good side, we have about an 8 or 9 month, if you're a young man or woman that wants to join the United States Marine Corps right now, it takes about 8 or 9 months before you can report to Paris Island or the recruit depot in San Diego. And you saw on one of the slides this morning that we're at 99.99% high school graduates, very few waivers, if any at all, with an extraordinary high quality of young men and women coming in. If you're an officer, this year, I went down to the commissioning at VMI a few weeks ago, and I commissioned those students. It's about a 12-month wait to report to the basic school at Quantico, Virginia, if you're a lieutenant coming out of an NROTC program. If you're in the Naval Academy or an enlisted commissioning program, we're getting you there within a couple months, but it's about a year wait for officers. So high-quality people, very difficult to get into the Marine Corps as an officer or enlisted Marine right now, but we have managed the force, and we'll have controls in there so that, as we've told Marines, if you bring your A game every day and you're high quality, there's going to be a place for you in the United States Marine Corps. And I think if there's anything I tried to convey in my remarks today is that I believe that there'll be a demand signal significant for United States Marines in the coming years. Certainly, we have some fiscal challenges. We're going to have to balance it. But right now, we've been able to go through the first round of reductions, establish an end strength of 182,000, and ensure, as importantly, that we have the right amount of support, operation, and maintenance money for training and the right amount of money for equipment to make sure we don't have a hollow force. I mean, that's one of the critical things we want to do is we want to make sure that whatever size force we have at the end of the day is a balanced force. That's high-quality people, that's good training, that's well-equipped. And those are the three things we focus on right now. And again, we've been able to do that during this first round of cuts, and we've been able to keep faith with our people. The question is, if you want to renew your contract, will a Marine be able to? Not everybody. Not everybody. And that's been historically so. I mean, if, you know, the United States Marine Corps, what I think few people realize is that about 60% of the United States Marine Corps is on their first enlistment. You know, the average age of the United States Marine Corps is in their early 20s. We are a first-term, very young force. And so it's the normal course of events that the majority of Marines who serve will serve 4 years and then return as better citizens from our perspective to the civilian world. But no, not every Marine that wants to stay will stay. And from our perspective, we have the opportunity to select those that are most qualified and most capable to stay in the Marine Corps to serve as a career Marine. Sir, I came right back, please.
General Alan Ryan from Boston. Would you speak to the relationship between the Marine Corps and the Joint Special Operations Command and the extent to which, if at all, special operations will play a role in the Marine Corps strategy in the Pacific going forward?
No, absolutely. First of all, we established a few years ago the Marine Special Operations Command. It's today at about 2,500 Marines. We're adding as a result of when we went through the comprehensive strategic review. At the same time, we conducted an internal, what we call force structure review, and we decided to add 800 more Marines to our Marine Special Operations Command down at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and Camp Pendleton, California. So we'll have on the order of about 3,300 Marines in the Special Operations Command. Those forces are assigned to Admiral McCraven in the Special Operations Command, and we fully expect that as we draw down out of Afghanistan, we'll be fully integrated. When I talk about those operations I spoke about with Marines, I understated the joint nature, as our Air Force comrade pointed out. I understated the nature of the joint force, not because it won't exist, but because I was here to speak today about the Marine Corps. But I fully expect that Special Operations Forces will be working integral with the Navy Marine Corps team. SEALs, Marine Special Operations Command, will be there. They'll be embarked aboard amphibious ships. They'll be operating off of a Seabased, and they'll be doing kind of the high-end theater security cooperation and engagement that the combatant commander needs to do. And I absolutely believe that the right mix of conventional and special operations forces will be exactly what we need to meet those requirements in the future. So I think there's a significant role both within the Marine Corps and within the Joint Force for Special Operations Command, working integral with forces like the Navy Marine Corps team embarked aboard ships. Does that get at your question? Yes, sir. Okay. Yes, sir, in the back.
Eric Wentz from Wheaton, Illinois. Today we've heard a great deal of emphasis placed upon the significance of technology in terms of how it affects our military preparedness. But in order to address the issue of trust, most specifically that you've alluded to this afternoon, how do we get about putting greater emphasis upon language skills? It seems to me that one of the areas of inadequacy of the United States military and even other branches and agencies of the U.S. government is that typically we expect the world to speak English. And as you know, I'm sure from your experience in different parts of the world, it would have helped if we'd had more people, for example, that spoke Farsi, that spoke Urdu, that could communicate to the natives on the ground in any given country in much of the world in which we're currently engaged in their language. Are language skills falling by the wayside largely because of the emphasis upon technology, or is it just something that remains inadequate, and I'm deliberately using that word, because we just don't see an application?
Sure, it's a great question, and I don't think you'll find a Marine in uniform that doesn't believe that cultural and language expertise is a critical enabler for anything that we will do in the future. In fact, this past year, for the first time, we used to solicit applications to do what we call foreign area officer program or regional expertise. And that's both staff non-commissioned officers, enlisted Marines, and officers who develop either language or cultural expertise to go operate in different regions and to provide inside the Marine Air Ground Task Force that kind of capability for wherever we might go. Last year, for the first time, we didn't solicit volunteers. We're just going out now and we're picking people. And we're picking people in the right numbers for the right languages, the right areas of cultural expertise that will give us the kind of capability we anticipate in the future. But the investment in human capital from a Marine, listen, you didn't hear me emphasize technology, and you won't hear Marines emphasize technology. We'll absolutely leverage technology. We'll adapt to it as it comes in. The F-35B, certainly a good example. The V-22, certainly a good example. But at the end of the day, in the top of our 4 priorities for the United States Marine Corps is training our young non-commissioned officers and junior officers for responsibilities in the future that is significantly greater than the challenges and the responsibilities I had on my shoulders as a second lieutenant. And a critical piece of that is your understanding of the culture, your understanding of the environment, your ability to speak the language, and what we would describe as the human factors that go into having capable combat units fielded in harm's way. So technology is a piece of it, but I unlike some people, don't believe that we've lost the need, both from an alliance perspective, to look face-to-face with people, because as you talked about, trust is an inherent component of a combat unit. The United States Marine Corps is founded on trust when it comes to going to combat, and I think that's as true when we talk about coalition or alliances. Trust is the foundation of it, not technology. The equipment, that'll all change. The technology will all change. The strategic landscape will all change, but I think that aspect of the human factors won't change a bit. Thanks. And Admiral Christensen has given me the hook. So thank you very much.